Welcome to the Geek in Review, the podcast focused on innovative and creative ideas in the legal industry. I'm Greg Lambert, and this week I'm going solo because I'm trying something a little bit different for our year-end episode. And before I begin, first of all, I want to thank Josh Kubicki, the brains behind the Brainyiacs Newsletter, for inspiring me to try this little trick out. So, undoubtedly, you've probably run across the NotebookLM tool that Google created that has an audio overview that takes information that you feed it and creates a podcast-style review of that information. Well, Josh pointed out that there's a new update to NotebookLM's audio overview where you can actually interact with the podcast host that they create. So I've fed NotebookLM the transcripts for all of the episodes of the Geek in Review for 2024. Now, there were 51 episodes, and I uploaded 50 of those, which was the max number that NotebookLM would allow me to do. So I actually cut out one, which was a repeat one from one that my firm did. So this is truly just the Geek in Review, so the 50 that were in there. I'm going to edit some of the audio here, so I'm going to take out some of the long pauses that happen in places, and I'm also going to kind of edit where when I click on the join button to have the host stop talking and talk to me and make it sound a little more smoothly than it is, just mostly for the editing purposes. So just want you to know this is not really a true back and forth style discussion. And I think as the NotebookLM tool gets things going, this will be better. But right now, what happens is once NotebookLM answers my questions, really wants to get back to discussing and getting back on the topic from its original output once it's answered my questions. So that being said, let's jump in. Again, remember, I've given it all 50 of my episodes. I'm going to jump in and ask it some questions. So let's see how it goes.
All right, so we're diving deep into the future of law today. We've got a whole bunch of articles and expert opinions to look at. We're talking AI revolutions, changing client demands, even a little bit about, how lawyers are doing, like mentally and emotionally.
It is really interesting how this all fits together. We've got insights from lawyers, legal tech folks, even law librarians.
Yeah.
It's like the legal world is at this crossroads,
Yeah, exactly. Oh, hey there. How can we help?
All right. So I'm Greg Lambert. I'm one of the co-hosts from the Geek in Review, and I wanted to talk to you about the 50 episodes. So what were some of the key themes that you heard after listening to all 50 episodes?
That's a fantastic question, and it's great to hear from you, Greg.
Yeah, it's like we have a special guest on our podcast.
Looking back, a few themes really stood out across those 50 episodes.
Okay, let's unpack this.
One big one is how much technology is changing the legal world.
Yeah, and not just AI, even though that is huge.
Exactly. Everything from data management to client communication.
I was noticing that there was a real push for more efficiency.
That's right. And also a big shift towards putting clients first.
What do you mean?
Well, clients are demanding more value, more transparency.
Oh, yeah, with pricing and things.
Exactly. And a lot of those guests talked about flat fee models.
Oh, yeah. I remember that from one of our sources, too.
And another theme was how much pressure lawyers are under.
Oh, yeah. The mental and emotional toll is something we can't ignore.
So I wanted to jump in there. We did the Love and Legal Tech series early in the year, where we had couples that worked in the legal tech industry. So looking at the Love and Legal Tech series, what stood out to you there?
Yeah, we love that series. It was super interesting.
Thinking about those Love and Legal Tech episodes, a few things really stood out.
Okay, let's unpack this.
One of the most fascinating aspects was how these couples navigated their personal and professional lives.
Like they were always on, work and life kind of blurred together.
Exactly. And it seems like for the most part, they really leaned into that.
Yeah, they made it work.
Many of them talked about the advantages of being able to brainstorm ideas in real time.
Oh, yeah, like bouncing ideas off of each other at the dinner table.
Exactly. And how they could cover for each other when family matters popped up.
So like a true partnership, both at home and work.
And it was interesting how many of them met through work.
Oh, yeah, it's like the legal tech industry is a breeding ground for love.
It really does seem that way.
And we heard from a few that were surprised to learn that they were working together.
Right. Some couples kept their marriage a secret at work for a while.
It's like they wanted to keep their professional and personal lives separate, you know?
Well, one of the couples discussed what they described as work-life integration. Do you mind elaborating on what they meant by this?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a term we heard a few times, and it's definitely worth exploring.
When couples talked about work-life integration, it wasn't about balancing two separate things.
Yeah, it's not like, 9 to 5 work, then 5 to whenever home.
Right. It was more about work and home lives blended together.
Like they weren't trying to keep them totally separate, but almost a single unit.
Exactly. And this was particularly interesting when thinking about couples in the same field.
Right. They weren't just coworkers, they were also life partners.
And because of that, work discussions often spilled into personal time and vice versa.
Like they could talk about a work problem while making dinner, for example.
And that's what really stood out. It was a seamless flow between the two.
One couple said they'd be talking about family and work issues in the same conversation.
It really does show how intertwined everything can become.
Yeah, so it's less about separation and more about like combining the two.
That said, some couples found that having separate personas was a helpful way to manage things.
Yeah, it's like they had a work version and a home version of themselves.
That way they could be strategic about work during work hours.
So what specific couples talked about that? Can you give some examples of where they had a different persona at work versus at home?
So Kate Boyd and Ryan McLeod of Senti Advisors, they mentioned it.
That's right. They said that they have a work persona and a personal persona.
They try to keep those separate so the work stuff doesn't spill in.
Exactly. They made it a point to keep those two areas of their lives distinct.
And, they're together most of the time, so it's probably pretty helpful for them.
And it wasn't just them. Cassie Verdevec and Alex McDonald, they also touched on this.
Oh, yeah, they said that they had to put up a united front at work.
Right. They were jointly running a team, so they had to present a united front.
But at home, they could actually vent to each other about work.
Which is, something you can't usually do with your coworkers.
Yeah, that's a great example of how their personas shifted between work and home.
Let's skip to another topic, and that's, I think, generative AI in legal tech was probably the hottest topic. So what themes emerged regarding the rise and impact of generative AI in the legal field this year?
We've definitely been hearing about AI everywhere.
So let's unpack the themes that emerged regarding generative AI.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting.
First, there was a lot of excitement and hype around AI.
Yeah, especially at the beginning of the year.
But also a lot of cynicism, too, as we saw.
Right, it's like people were either super excited or super worried.
And that led to a big question. What's the real impact on jobs?
A lot of people wondered if AI was going to replace lawyers.
And most of our sources in legal tech didn't think that was likely.
Yeah, it's more about AI augmenting human ability, not replacing it.
Instead, many saw AI as a powerful tool to boost productivity.
Yeah, to help lawyers work smarter, not just harder.
And a lot of the conversations focused on how AI could automate routine tasks.
Oh, yeah, like document review or legal research.
And that would free up lawyers to do higher level work.
Right, the stuff that needs human skill.
And we also heard about the importance of prompt engineering.
Oh, yeah, being able to ask AI the right questions.
And that highlighted the need for new skills in the legal profession.
Yeah, it's not just about knowing the law, it's about knowing how to use AI.
Yeah, so what were some of the leaders and innovators, say like Chris Sakunis or Dr. Megan Ma? What were they saying about this?
That's a great question, Greg. It's definitely worth looking into what some of those leaders and innovators have said.
Absolutely. And we did hear from a lot of people who were pushing boundaries.
Okay, let's unpack this. We heard from Chris Ford from Legal Technology Hub, for example.
That's right. He described how Nikki Shaver started the company from a personal frustration of not being able to find legal tech solutions in one place.
Yeah, so they decided to build their own to solve that problem.
It really shows a proactive approach to innovation.
And then we have people like Pablo Redondo from Case Text.
He talked about the challenges and intensity of launching CoCounsel.
And he said that it was, tough on his family too.
He was very open about how consuming it was.
It also shows, though, how they're really pushing boundaries with AI.
Absolutely. And then there's also people like Boone Liebert et al.
Oh, yeah, she talked about librarians taking a leadership role in the AI era.
She really highlighted how they're uniquely positioned to bridge the gap.
She believes they should be innovation intermediaries.
Right, and that it's really important for them to step up and lead.
And let's not forget people like Ted Theodoropoulos from InfoDash.
He brought up the concept of innovation theater. It's fascinating.
Yeah, where firms focus on like superficial innovation instead of real change.
So he's suggesting that people should be more critical about the changes they're making.
And Jim Andrews from Minner Ellison, He emphasized the need for training.
And the importance of partnering with tech providers.
Yes, so the people who are using the technology know how to use it well.
And he mentioned using champions in different business units to encourage adoption.
Okay, so those are just some of the innovators and leaders we heard from.
They really demonstrate the importance of a forward-thinking mindset.
They sure do.
Well, let's change gears a little bit and talk about data management and security. We can't really talk about generative AI and the advancements in the legal tech without talking about these themes. So what were some key takeaways, say, from Kelly Griswold's emphasis on data management now being a core business function in the legal industry?
It's super important to talk about data management and security.
Absolutely. And Kelly Griswold from ONA had a lot of interesting things to say about this.
She really emphasized that data management is a core function now.
Right. It's not just an IT thing anymore. It's crucial for all operations.
Talked about how companies need to get their data in order before they implement AI.
Exactly. It's like building a strong foundation for all the exciting new tech.
She also mentioned how the hype around generative AI is bringing data management to the forefront.
Yeah, it's forcing companies to realize that garbage in, garbage out is a real thing.
And she said that last year was the year of experimentation, this year is implementation.
And companies are quickly realizing that the data is key to making it work.
She also pointed out that the legal industry is uniquely positioned to handle this data.
Because we've been transforming unstructured data into structured data for years.
So all that experience is actually really valuable in the AI era.
So can you talk more about which guests discussed information governance, data protection, and ethical technology use? And I know that you said the term garbage in, garbage out. I know that Kelly Griswold wasn't the only guest that talked about that as well.
You're right that Kelly wasn't the only one to use the term garbage in, garbage out.
We heard it a lot, actually.
Tim Andrews from Minter Ellison talked about the importance of training.
Yes, he emphasized partnering with tech providers and getting people comfortable with the tools.
He also mentioned that Minter Ellison set up a digital academy for this.
And that shows, that they were taking it seriously. That's for sure.
June Liebert et al., she said that librarians should be innovation intermediaries.
Yeah, they're uniquely positioned to lead on things like data governance.
And they should ensure that AI is being used ethically and responsibly.
And Ken Jones and John Smith from the LT Evolve conference, they really focused on cybersecurity.
They emphasize security, privacy, and governance as the big three for AI.
Yeah, so those are key things to think about when using any new technology.
And also Ed Walters from VLEX, he highlighted transparency in AI.
Oh yeah, he talked about the prompt assist feature in Vincent AI.
That was designed to give users more control over the AI and build trust.
So it's not just a black box, you can see what's going on.
So speaking of not just a black box and being transparent, what were some of the other themes on transparency during this age of AI in legal tech?
A lot of our sources stress the need for transparency in AI.
Especially to build trust with both lawyers and clients.
Right, and that's why we kept hearing about explainable AI.
Oh yeah, where you can see why an AI is giving you a certain result.
Exactly, and some tools give you that ability to dig into the details.
Like Ed Walters for VLEX. He really emphasized the importance of auditability.
That's right. And having that control over the AI, like we just mentioned with the prompt assist feature.
And even if the tech is complex, you need a way to understand it.
And a lot of companies mention that they're not just throwing stuff out there to get used.
They're making sure these tools are used responsibly.
And it's not just about tech, but also the human side of things too.
Yeah, like making sure that AI tools don't have bias built into them.
And we also heard a lot about the need for data privacy.
Right, ensuring that your client's information is secure and protected.
So transparency is really about accountability and trust in AI.
It's about making sure these tools are fair and safe for everyone.
So you've mentioned a lot of these topics. Can you name specifically some of the guests that talked about these?
So when we talked about explainable AI, Ed Walters from VLEX was a big one.
Right. He highlighted how important it is to see how AI is coming up with answers.
And when we were discussing ethical considerations, June Liebert et al. Definitely stood out.
She really pushed for librarians to take the lead on responsible tech use.
And for data governance, we heard a lot from Kelly Griswold at ONA.
She really emphasized that data management is now a core business function.
And for security, Ken Jones and Josh Smith at the LT Evolve conference were key.
Yes, they stressed that data privacy and cybersecurity are crucial in the age of AI.
And of course, Tim Andrews from Minter Ellison really focused on the need for training.
Right. He talked about how important it is to get everyone up to speed on new technologies.
So those are just some of the people who really stood out to us.
And they really showcase how many perspectives there are on these issues.
Well, let's move into legal technology tools and the vendors we discussed this year. What were some of the highlights of discussions with the big players like Thomson Reuters with their case text and co-counsel, or LexisNexis with Protege, and even Bloomberg and VLex? What were the highlights of those big players this year?
We did talk to Ed Walters from VLex, who, he's really pushing transparency in AI.
Yeah, he highlighted their prompt assist feature in Vincent AI, which is designed to give users more control.
Right. So you can see how it's coming up with answers. It's not just a black box.
And we also heard from Serena Wellen at LexisNexis about their AI assistant called Lexis Protege.
She was talking about how it's a personalized AI tool that learns what you need.
Yeah, so it adapts to how you work, which is really interesting.
And when we talked to Pablo Arredondo at Case Text, he was really open about the intensity of launching co-counsel.
He was talking about how much effort and focus it takes to create something like that.
He also touched on the challenges of balancing innovation with, personal life.
And Bloomberg Law, they recently acquired Dashboard Legal, which seems like a really strategic move.
Oh yeah, Matthew Rotenberg from Dashboard Legal talked about combining structured workflows, content, and AI.
Right, it's like they're moving towards more integrated solutions.
And that might be where this whole thing is heading, these like all-in-one platforms.
These companies are not just throwing a tool out there, they're thinking about how these tools can fit into workflows.
Yeah, it's about making all of this as easy and seamless as possible.
So let's get away from the big companies for a minute and talk about some of the smaller vendors that are creating, say, more point solutions for legal tech. For example, there may be Diligence comes to mind. So what are the smaller vendors doing enhancing workflows with generative AI?
You're right. Smaller vendors are often the ones pushing boundaries in very specific areas.
For example, you brought up there's Diligence, and they are very focused on AI due diligence.
They're using AI to streamline that whole process, automating the review of contracts and documents.
And that's something that can take up a ton of time.
Absolutely. They're a good example of a point solution that is very powerful.
And then we have companies like Alexi who are focusing on litigation workflows.
They have AI tools to assist with research, discovery, and even drafting documents.
Yeah, and that's really helpful for litigation teams.
And it seems like I feel like the smaller vendors are more focused on, specific pain points.
Right. It's like instead of trying to do everything, they're solving one problem really well.
And another trend is that many are building on existing platforms and tools.
Oh, yeah. So rather than creating entirely new systems, they're just adding a specific function.
That's right. That might be a more efficient way to approach things for some firms.
Can you give an example of that where a company is building upon a platform already?
Absolutely. That's a great question, Greg. So, we talked about a company like Alexi, right, that is focused on litigation workflows.
Yes, and they are building upon the Microsoft suite of tools.
Exactly. Instead of creating everything from scratch, they're using Microsoft and building the litigation-specific AI tools on top of it.
It's a way for them to integrate with existing systems that many law firms are already using, which makes it easier for firms to adopt their tech.
Right. They don't need to switch to a completely new system, just add to what they already have, which is smart.
And it makes it easier for lawyers, too, because they don't need to learn a completely new platform.
That's a great point. So by building on those familiar platforms, those smaller vendors can offer solutions that integrate more easily into existing workflows.
Exactly. And that's what they were seeing a lot of in the legal tech space.
And it makes total sense. It's about making things more seamless and efficient for the end user.
Absolutely. So as we've been saying, it's all about finding tools that actually fit into people's workflow. And this is another example of that.
So there's one of the good things about the legal technology community is that there's a lot of collaboration and even some social impact. So let's look at guests like, say, Tom Martin, and even initiatives like the one at Fagery Drinkers Redesign Legal Design Lab. What have your guests said about their impact on collaboration and social impact?
You mentioned Tom Martin from LawDroid. He's a great example of someone with a strong focus on social impact.
That's right. He really emphasizes that LawDroid is designed to help make the legal system more accessible to underserved communities.
Yeah, he's using AI and automation to break down barriers to justice.
And he's also co-founder of the Legal Technology Awards, which really highlights the industry's commitment to social impact.
And you brought up Fager Drinker's Legal Design Lab. They're really focused on bringing people together to solve problems creatively.
Right. DJ Gross talked about bringing in clients, community organizations, and internal staff to brainstorm better solutions.
Yeah, and they use design thinking, which is all about empathy and collaboration.
And it's not just about the big complex cases either. They also use this approach for pro bono work and community outreach.
And they're always trying to incorporate fun and exciting technology, which is a great idea.
It really shows a commitment to increasing both collaboration and joy.
So I think there's a real sense that the legal field is starting to prioritize collaboration for sure.
So let's pull on that thread about skills and emotional intelligence that you talked about. What were some of Rachel Bosch's key points on developing communication and emotional intelligence skills for lawyers?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about the why. Now let's talk about the how.
So Rachel Bosch from Fringe Professional Development had a lot to say about this. One of her biggest points was the need for self-awareness.
Oh, yeah, like knowing your own communication style.
Exactly. She said you can't really improve until you understand where you're starting from.
So recognizing if you're too direct or maybe too passive, right?
Mhm. And she also emphasized the importance of emotional intelligence
Oh, yeah, like understanding how your emotions impact your communication.
and also how to recognize and manage other people's emotions.
Right. So it's not just about your feelings, but other people's too.
And she said that emotional regulation is a key challenge, especially in law.
Yeah, because historically, law schools have encouraged lawyers to check their emotions at the door.
Which she says means that no one learns how to manage those feelings.
And she mentioned brain-based coaching as a way to get better at that.
Right, because it grounds the process in neuroscience to make it more concrete.
And she also brought up the concept of upward feedback.
Yes, getting feedback from your team and from your clients, that's really essential.
And she designed a tool for that is like confidential and easy to use.
Because, she noted, most lawyers aren't very good at giving or receiving feedback,
And she said it's often about addressing those behavioral patterns.
rather than making a judgment about someone's personality, which doesn't change.
So in addition to Rachel Bosch, I know there were guests like Zena Applebaum and other guests that addressed emotional intelligence this year. Can you talk about them as well?
Oh, yeah, she was on our episode about Legal Week.
And although she didn't discuss emotional intelligence directly, she did touch on empathy,
Right. When you're dealing with sensitive data, you have to be aware of people's feelings.
which I think is a really important aspect of emotional intelligence.
Absolutely. And then there were some others like Caroline Hill.
Yes, in her episode, she talked a lot about how the legal tech industry is changing.
And when there's that much change, it can be hard for people to adjust.
Right. So leaders need to be able to manage that transition with empathy.
And that's all part of emotional intelligence, understanding how to lead through change.
And also the whole concept of collaboration that we talked about earlier.
Oh, yeah, that really brings in the human element of things.
Because when you're working together, emotional intelligence is key.
Like when people are working at the legal design lab.
Yes. And those initiatives are a good reminder that these human skills are so important.
So which of the guests discussed things like ethical technology use and client trust related to regulatory developments?
Several guests touched on those themes, so let's unpack this.
Okay, here we go.
June Liebert et al. Was really big on ethical tech use.
Right. She was pushing for librarians to lead the way on that.
She was saying that they need to make sure that AI is used responsibly.
Yeah, that it's not just about adopting new tools, but doing it thoughtfully.
And we also heard from Ken Jones and Josh Smith at the LTA Evolve conference.
Oh, yeah, they emphasize how important it is to have strong security measures.
Especially when you're dealing with client data, of course.
And that relates to client trust because data privacy is a big deal.
Exactly. And Ed Walters from VLEX, he talked about transparency in AI.
Yeah, he highlighted their prompt assist feature so people can understand how it works.
And that builds trust with users because they can actually see what's going on.
And of course, we heard about regulatory developments too.
That was touched on in the discussion about ethical walls.
Yes, Nikki Black brought that up in our Legal Tech in 2024 episode.
And I think a lot of guests really stress that you can't have one without the other.
Right. You need to have ethical tech use and client trust to navigate all of this.
What about the Bommeritos during the Love and Legal Tech series? I know they talked about ethics and technology. Can you highlight some of the things that they said?
Yeah, they were definitely a memorable couple from that series.
You're right. The Bommeritos did touch on ethics and technology, so let's unpack this.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting.
Michael Bommarito talked about how a lot of the big AI model providers didn't really consider ethics early on.
Oh, yeah, he mentioned that like technical teams were just focused on the technology.
And they didn't really think about things like toxicity or copyright issues.
Right. Until those issues started to show up later.
And he said that there's a real cost to going back and fixing those problems after they've accumulated.
Like they built a house without a solid foundation, and now they have to redo it.
Exactly. And I also emphasized the importance of a human-centered approach to AI.
It can't just be about the tech, but about how it affects people.
And they really made a point to say that tech should serve people and not the other way around.
Yeah, I think that is a really important point, particularly in the legal field.
Right. So they highlighted that it's not enough to just build something cool. You have to be ethical about it.
And those are great insights that really underscore the need to consider the long-term implications of technology.
One other long-term effect of technology, especially generative AI, is going to be training. So what themes were discussed about training, say, new associates, whether they're in law school or when they arrive at a firm? What's kind of the position that the guests took on training this year?
Yeah, you're right. Training and education, that's a huge part of this whole puzzle.
So let's unpack some of the things we heard about training, both for law students and new associates.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting.
Abdi Shinista from Alta Claro pointed out that law firms are having to pick up where law schools leave off.
It's like law schools aren't quite keeping pace with all this new technology.
Right, and it's leaving firms with the responsibility of training new lawyers on AI and tech.
Which is a big shift. Firms usually focus more on legal skills, not tech.
Exactly, and that means they need to have more robust training programs.
And that's where people like Tim Andrews at Minter Ellison come in.
Yes, they actually created a digital academy to get everyone up to speed.
It's a really proactive and strategic approach to tech adoption.
And it shows a real commitment to change management, too.
And we also heard from Caitlin Vaughn, and she talked about her firm's approach.
That's right. They flipped the script, and instead of just a brief boot camp, they did full-time training.
That is really different. For 8.5 weeks, the new associates got that training.
And it was a mix of technical skills, professional skills, even a mini MBA.
So a really comprehensive approach that goes beyond the typical training programs.
And she said that what they know from adult learning theory is that you have to learn and do the skills to retain the knowledge.
There were also some discussions on training attorneys to become effective prompt engineers. What were the pros and cons discussed this year about focusing in on training attorneys to be prompt engineers?
It's definitely a nuanced area.
Okay, so on the one hand, it's clear that prompt engineering is a really valuable skill.
Absolutely. Being able to effectively communicate with AI, it's not just about knowing the law anymore.
Right. You've got to be able to ask the right questions to get the best results from these tools.
And as we've discussed, some of the AI tools have the ability to help you understand why the AI came up with the answer.
So training lawyers to become skilled prompt engineers would mean that they can use AI much more effectively in their practice.
And that could really boost their productivity and their efficiency.
But it's also worth noting that not everyone thinks this should be the main focus,
Right. Some people mention that you shouldn't get caught up in just the technical side.
They think that lawyers should really prioritize the skills that are uniquely human, like critical thinking and relationship building.
And that ties into the idea that AI is a tool that you use, but not the end product itself.
So a con might be that if lawyers get too focused on prompt engineering, they might miss out on other important skills.
It also raises the question of how much time and resources firms should invest in this specific kind of training.
Yeah. Is it better to train all lawyers to be proficient prompt engineers or to have specialists?
And like we heard from Abday, law schools are having a hard time keeping up with all this new technology.
So it might be up to firms to train all their lawyers in this new skill, which is a big investment.
And firms need to decide what they're willing to specialize in.
So speaking of law firms and using this generative AI, can you identify any specific use cases discussed by folks within law firms for generative AI and name which person and law firms were mentioned in that?
Yeah, and we did hear about a number of very concrete use cases for generative AI within law firms. So for instance, Minter Ellison, they've been using Microsoft Copilot.
Yes, and Amber O'Mara and Tim Andrews talked about creating a digital academy to train everyone to use it well.
They're using it for all sorts of things, like document drafting, summarizing information, and research.
And it seems to really boost productivity when you have the training to use it properly.
And we heard from Mark Doble at Alexi. They have an AI tool for litigation workflows.
Yeah, they're using AI to assist with research discovery and document drafting too.
Right, so it really streamlines the whole litigation process.
And then there's Bloomberg Law. They acquired Dashboard Legal.
And Matthew Rotenberg was talking about how they're using AI to combine workflows, content, and data.
Yeah, so it's not just a standalone AI tool, it's really baked into their platform.
And of course, there are firms that are using AI for due diligence, like there's Diligence.
Right, they're using AI to automate contract reviews and document analysis.
And I think a lot of firms are exploring how to use AI for things like contract review and legal research.
That was a really common theme we heard, yeah.
I heard that AI could help with all that, but it really depends on the specific firm, and it's neat.
And it's worth mentioning that firms are also using AI for things like client communication.
And some firms are even using AI to help with flat fee pricing models.
Right, and we heard that mentioned a few times as well.
Okay, so hopefully those are some good examples.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of concrete examples, I know we had Dr. Megan Ma on to talk about the M&A emulator that they designed through Codex. And then we also had on a guest who was actually literally the brains behind the process of that. Can you talk about that M&A deal and it's the emulator that they set up?
Yeah, and you're right. We had both Dr. Megan Ma and Conrad Everhard on the show.
Megan Ma from Codex, she was leading the project at Stanford.
Right, and they were creating this M&A negotiation simulator using AI agents.
And, Conrad Everhard, he was actually the legal expert behind the project.
Yeah, he was from Flatiron Law, and he provided the knowledge of what to program.
You mentioned that it was frustrating at first because the AI wasn't really getting the nuances.
Right, it was just spitting back junk, as he said.
But then, with him spoon-feeding the model, it started to come to life.
Exactly. He had to guide the AI through all the complexities of M&A deals, like liability profiles.
And he said that they focused specifically on the term sheet and liability,
which is a very complicated part of the negotiation.
And eventually, he said the simulator was able to actually negotiate back with him.
That's right. He was trying to get a 50% cap on liability with a 5-year survival period, which he said was unreasonable.
And the AI came back and said, "You're out of your mind. That's not market."
It's pretty amazing, really, how far the simulator had come along.
Yeah, and they learned a lot about prompting and guiding these large language models.
And, Conrad said that it taught them how to summarize info and find complex information.
And they're incorporating those lessons into their own due diligence efforts now.
So it's a great example of how hands-on experience can really push the boundaries of legal tech.
Absolutely. And it's all about knowing that you have to provide the context and the guidance.
And now they're actually looking at taking the next iteration of that project private, because right now it's open source.
Which is also really interesting since they are opening it up to everyone to participate.
They want to get tax lawyers and other experts to contribute to it, so it gets even better.
So that M&A simulator was definitely a key moment in the evolution of AI in law.
Well, let's wrap this up. Is there any big topics that were discussed this year that we haven't highlighted yet?
Well, one big theme was definitely the ethics of AI and how to make sure we're using it responsibly.
I mean, yeah, like bias in algorithms and data privacy concerns. That was June, Ken, and Josh.
So firms need to use AI responsibly and with strong security, like we heard from them.
Right. It's not enough to just adopt new tech. You need to do it thoughtfully.
And we heard about companies like VLEX focusing on transparency with AI.
Yeah, so people can trust the technology and understand what's happening, like Ed said.
And it was also clear that the legal field is at a big inflection point.
Yeah, like we're at the beginning of a huge wave of change.
And that means that everyone, lawyers and firms, they need to adapt.
It's about finding the best way to use AI to your advantage.
And finally, we heard about AI democratizing access to legal information.
Yeah, how AI can make things like complex legal documents easier to understand, like Rich and Kara said.
So it wasn't just about improving things for lawyers.
It was also about making the legal system more accessible to everyone.
Yeah, speaking of the access to justice issue, or A to J as it's referred to, who were some of the guests that we had that really focused in on access to justice issues?
We had Kara Peterson and Rich Tabona from Describe.ai, And they were really focused on making legal information more accessible to everyone, especially those who don't have it right now.
That's right. They see it as a public health issue, and how the legal system is set up is not really ideal for anyone. And that's what got them so interested in it.
And then, of course, there's Tom Harton from LawDroid. He's also very focused on making legal services more accessible to underserved communities.
And he's using AI and automation to help break down some of those barriers.
And Sarah Glassmeyer and Nikki Black, they talked about how some really useful legal tech tools that could help self-represented litigants are often not allowed because of UPL concerns.
Right. They both mentioned some AI tools that could really help people, but there are some obstacles to actually getting them into the hands of the people who need them.
Okay, so those are just a few examples of people who are really passionate about access to justice.
And it really does highlight how technology can play a role in making the legal system fairer and more equitable.
Changing gears just a little bit, there was a Stanford study that came out at the end of May that went through and benchmarked a lot of the legal research tools like Westlaw and Lexis and others, and it found that there was a big difference between the marketing of those tools and saying how they did or did not hallucinate versus what the group at Stanford found out. Can you talk more about that study, both the good things and some of the issues that revolved around that study?
Yeah, it really did stir up a lot of discussion in the legal tech community.
Okay, so let's unpack this. It was a benchmarking survey on how well legal research tools were doing with AI.
Right. And there was definitely a big difference between the marketing claims and what the researchers found.
Yeah, some of these tools were claiming to be hallucination free, but the study showed that wasn't really the case.
And I think that really highlighted how important it is to be skeptical, right? And not just believe all the marketing claims.
Absolutely. And it's not just about legal research tools. We've heard from other guests too about how vendors are not always transparent with their AI.
That's right. It shows the need for independent research and testing of these tools so people can make informed decisions.
And, it wasn't all bad. The study also highlighted that some of the AI tools were, actually pretty good at some things.
Yes. And I believe the researchers did update their report too to reflect the tools that actually focus on legal research.
That's right, because the initial report had some tools that weren't really legal research tools.
So it shows that even these research groups are learning as they go, and we all have to be flexible and willing to change.
And what I thought was interesting was that it put vendors under pressure, right, to be more transparent about their AI tech.
Yeah, so let's have a little fun looking back at the podcast this year. I know that I am notorious for saying things like all problems are communication problems, and I have those types of phrases that I use time and time again. What were some other phrases that you saw that either I or Marlene repeated frequently throughout the year in the podcast?
That's a fun question, Greg. It's good to take a moment to look back on some of those recurring phrases.
Yeah, okay.
You're right. Your phrase, all problems are communication problems, really became a hallmark. And Marlene often says, you know what I mean? At the end of her sentences.
Oh, yeah, that's a great one. It's like a way of checking to see if we're on the same page.
You're right. And those are just a few of the phrases that really stick out.
We really do have our own little podcast language.
And you're right. It is fun to recognize how those things have become a part of the show.
So looking back at the 50 episodes, I mean, this podcast is called The Geek in Review. So let's focus on the geeky part. So what did you think was the geekiest topic discussed on the podcast this year?
Okay, so if I had to pick just one, I'd say the M&A negotiation simulator that Codex built, that was next level.
Oh, yeah, that was fascinating. And I think you're right. It definitely stands out as a really geeky project.
They literally built an AI that could negotiate a deal. It's crazy.
Yeah, and you had Conrad Everhard, that lawyer, actually showing the simulator how it should work. It was wild.
It's like they were pushing the boundaries of what's even possible.
They were really getting into the weeds of term sheets and liability caps.
And then you had Megan Ma explaining the whole project using AI.
It's a fantastic example of how AI can be used to enhance both legal and business expertise.
So yeah, that M&A simulator really takes the cake for geekiest topic of the year.
What about data visualization? I think that's pretty geeky. Did we talk about data visualization?
That's a great point, Greg. Tonight, data visualization is pretty geeky too.
Yeah, and we definitely did talk about it. Tim Follett from StructureFlow, he was a key guest.
He was talking about how legal is traditionally very word focused.
Mm-hmm. You know, like those medieval parchments, it's like the written word is king or queen.
But he was saying how data visualization is so important.
Right, because there's so much complexity now, you need to be able to cut through it.
He gave that example of the Dutch East India Company, how they were mapping things.
Yeah, and JP Morgan, he had a chart in 1913. It's all about understanding relationships.
And now we have technology, so it's easier to visualize stuff than ever before.
Absolutely. So you're right. Data visualization is a pretty geeky topic.
So let me wrap this up. Every episode typically ends with what the host called the crystal ball question. So looking at all of the crystal ball questions from this year, what were some commonalities of what people were looking at would challenge or change the industry in the next 2 to 5 years?
That's a fantastic way to bring things back around, Greg. And you're right, that crystal ball question is a key part of the podcast.
Yeah, it's like everyone we talked to got a chance to look into the future.
So looking at all of those crystal ball responses, a few things really stand out as common themes.
Okay, let's unpack this. I think the biggest one was like the rise of AI and generative AI, like Jaron from Henchman said.
Absolutely. Everyone was trying to figure out how AI will impact the legal industry, both in terms of the challenges and the opportunities.
And that ties into the second big thing, which was the need for training and adaptation.
Right. A lot of people mention that lawyers will have to develop new skills to keep up with technology.
Like Tim Andrews mentioned with Digital Academy.
And that included not just technical skills, but soft skills like communication and emotional intelligence, too, as Rachel Bosch said.
Which is a big change for the legal field where those haven't been as prioritized.
And a lot of guests brought up the need to invest in data management and security, like we heard from Kelly Griswold and others.
If you don't have good data, the AI won't be all that useful.
And there were a lot of concerns around ethical considerations and transparency, too.
Right. That was a big thing for people like Ed Walders and June Liebert.
There was also this recurring theme about the importance of collaboration and innovation.
That's like what we heard about from the Legal Design Lab.
And of course, several guests touched on the need for law firms to move away from the billable hour
and start adopting value-based pricing, like we heard from Conrad Eberhard.
So those were some of the common things that people were saying when they looked into the future.
Well, I want to thank both of you for taking all of my questions. This has been fascinating to look at the 50 episodes and then have this conversation reviewing those. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome, Greg. And thank you for such thoughtful questions.
Yeah, it's been a blast having you chime in and really dig into everything. Yeah, and for sharing your insights and thoughts with us.
So again, I want to thank Josh Kubicki for giving me this idea of jumping in with NotebookLM on the audio overview. I think this is pretty fascinating. It's interesting to be able to take content and have this type of a conversation. It's definitely not perfect. There was a lot of things I think that they missed. They kept kind of going back to the same things over and over again. But again, really interesting to have this kind of conversation. So I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed talking and having the conversation with NotebookLM. And this is our end of year, so I want to wish everyone happy holidays and a happy new year. If you enjoyed listening to all the episodes this year of the Geek in Review, please take the time to share it with your friends and colleagues. And if you want to learn more from us, Marlene and I are both on LinkedIn and Blue Sky, and I'm sure you can reach us other places as well. And as always, the music that you hear is from Jerry David DeSica. So thanks, Jerry, and Happy New Year, everyone.